I have 5 books to share with you today. 4 of them are my favorite lit fic that I read last year and 1 favorite non-fic. And while I was getting this stack together, I realized that all of these books I would love to reread. Actually, one I just did a reread, but I've already decided I'm going to do a 3rd read, so I think that's a good sign that I want to reread these. So most of these have wrap-ups, the first one does not, but for the ones that do have wrap-ups, I will link that down in the description. And the first book I must have read in February or March of last year, so I don't have a wrap-up. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. And I initially put off reading this book because it was so hyped up and I thought, oh, that book's not for me. It's about friendship and video games and it's literary fiction. I don't think I'm that interested. Well, I gave into the hype finally, and I'm glad I did because I ended up really enjoying this. And if you're not familiar, Tomorrow, 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 that's a line from Macbeth, and that is referenced in the book. So this book spans 30 years, from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Venice Beach, California. It's a dazzling and intricately imagined novel that examines the multifarious nature of identities, disability, failure, the redemptive possibilities in play, and above all, the need to connect, to be loved, and to love. Now, this is a love story, but not one that you would expect. This follows 2 friends' totally platonic love from childhood up through college. And even before they graduate, they put out a massive hit of a video game. This gets them really rich. So then you follow them through all their ups and downs in their personal lives and in their friendship. This was beautifully written. I tabbed so many things in here. I also learned a lot of new words, so I always love that. Emily Dickinson's poetry is referenced in this book, and so what I did when I read this is I alternated reading chapters of this book along with Emily Dickinson poetry. So this book tackles a few pretty dark topics. I would look up content warnings if you are at all concerned. There is one thing I will say, there is a relationship between a teacher and a student, so you have that power dynamic there, and it does seem to cause some trauma within that character. And there is something even more tragic that happens in this book. It is heartbreaking, emotional, it's engaging, and I enjoyed the little bit of nostalgia that I got from this book as well, because they weren't just talking about current games or made-up games that the characters created in this book, but they also mentioned Super Mario Brothers, Oregon Trail, games that I grew up with, and so that was kind of cool to see. And I just have a few quotes I would like to share with you. She started walking towards the train, and Sam tried to figure out a way to make her stop. If this were a game, he could hit pause. He could restart, see different things, the right ones this time. He could search his inventory for the item that would make Sadie not leave. And so she'd be cool, because that's what mistresses were. Mistress, Sadie thought. Sadie laughed a bit to herself, thinking this was what it was like to play someone else's game, to have the illusion of choice, without actual choice. 1 minute Sam was there, the game was completed, and the world was filled with potential. 12 hours later, Sam was gone, the game was far from her thoughts, and the world was grim and murderous. It is the same world, she thought, but I am different. Or is it a different world, but I am the same? Each time Alice loses, the gamer is given the option to restart the game. But the gamer will never win the first level. Winning is accepting that there are some races a person cannot win. Throughout his life, Sam had hated being told to fight, as if sickness were a character failing. Illness could not be defeated no matter how hard you fought, and pain, once it had you in its grasp, was transformational. And this is a section that the line Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is from, in Macbeth. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools, the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player, that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I'm glad I gave into the hype and read this one. And also I love the cover. That's The Great Wave by the Japanese artist. It's fractal art. Really cool. I also love that on the back. Again, if you are interested in reading this, I would look up content warnings. Maybe some of them may be spoilerish, but if you are sensitive, then it's up to you to look those up if you want to. But other than that, I would recommend it, and I would say it's hype for a reason. And the next lit fic also has elements of a psychological thriller and mystery. It's also been considered dark academia, and I read this one in April, so that wrap up will be linked down below. Not this past April, last April. And that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. And in this, we start out in the prologue. You basically find out kind of what happened. You find out that somebody has been murdered, and there's a group of people standing around their body. And so you have an idea of who was killed and maybe who was involved, but you don't know exactly who and exactly why. So then you flash back, and it goes back some time, and you start out with this group of students out of college, and they're meeting with this really interesting professor. It almost has a little bit of a cult feeling. And even though you kind of start out knowing how it's going to end, Donna Tartt really helps build the tension all throughout the book. I was constantly wondering, oh, is this what made these people snap? Is this what's going to do it? The characters are really interesting and bizarre, and I just had so many questions about these people in general. People, characters. Hey, Fritzy, you want to sit over here? I don't think you can jump that way. He's not the most graceful cat. Okay. Are you gonna not whine if you see her? Ow. This definitely follows some morally gray characters. I mean, dark gray, I'll say. And the ending, wow, it just spirals. You find out exactly what happened, what they were doing. It is absolutely wild. I would love to reread this. As you can see, I annotated quite a bit my first go around. So I think it would be really good to read this again and see what I think now. I have heard some people complaining about this book, and there's problematic things in it supposedly, as well as tomorrow. People have said that, so I'm curious to read them again and see if I can pick up on what people are talking about. I mean, but tomorrow, I would assume it's the whole teacher-student power dynamic. In this one, I've heard something else, so I don't know. I'd have to read it and see for myself. This next one I read in May, so that May wrap-up will be linked down below. Another heavily annotated book. This may be one of my most annotated books. I not only have a lot of tabs, but I've also underlined a lot, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. And you can tell that this book is well loved because the title itself is becoming invisible. It's totally wearing off. But I don't want to get another copy because I like this one. It has really nice floppiness to it. And also, this is the one I read, it has all my tabs, it has all my underlining and little asterisks and things like that, so I'm gonna always keep this one. And so in this book, we follow Addie LaRue, and this spans over a few hundred years, from the late 1600s to the early 2000s. And when she is growing up, she is supposedly going to be set up in an arranged marriage. And she doesn't want to have that. She doesn't want that life. She wants to have her own life. And so she speaks with a neighbor lady, and she finds out that she can basically make a wish. And I think it's to a particular tree. Some of these I read a while ago, so it's kind of hard to remember exactly. I just remember that I loved it, so that's why I want to reread it. And so she makes a wish to a tree. But the lady tells her, make sure you don't do it when it's dark, because then you're basically making a deal with darkness, and then bad things can happen. Well, it becomes the day where she's supposed to be given off in this marriage, and she runs away, and she just doesn't make it in time, and she accidentally makes the wish when it's dark. And so she gets what she wants. She gets out of the marriage, but it comes at a price. And with that, basically, she gets to live forever and live on her own, have her own life. but nobody can remember her. Nobody can really know who she is. She can't say her name. She can't write her name. People can't remember her. Let's say they meet her face to face. The second she leaves their sight, they forget her. And when they see her, it's like a totally new person. So she can't really build relationships or a home. So we follow her on that journey of trying to make connections. And eventually she does run into somebody who can remember her, which is quite odd. And then you find out the reason why he can remember her. This also had beautiful writing, and I have a few quotes to share with you. What is a person, if not the marks they leave behind? She has learned to step between the thorny weeds, but there are some cuts that cannot be avoided. A memory, a photograph, a name. Adeline has decided she would rather be a tree. If she must grow roots, she would rather be left to flourish wild instead of pruned, would rather stand alone, allowed to grow beneath the open sky. Better that than firewood, cut down just to burn in someone else's hearth. And this is what she's settled on. She can go without food, she will not wither. She can go without heat, the cold will not kill her. But a life without art, without wonder, without beautiful things, she would go mad. She has gone mad. What she needs are stories. Stories are a way to preserve oneself, to be remembered, and to forget. Stories come in so many forms, in charcoal and in song, in paintings, poems, films, and books. Books, she has found, are a way to live 1,000 lives, or to find strength in a very long one. That is the madness of it. Every day is amber, and she is a fly trapped inside. No way to think in days or weeks when she lives in moments. Time begins to lose its meaning, and yet she has not lost track of time. She cannot seem to misplace it, no matter how she tries. And so Addie knows what month it is, what day, what night, and so she knows it has been a year. A year since she ran from her own wedding. A year since she fled into the woods. A year since she sold her soul for this, for freedom, for time. A year, and she has spent it learning the boundaries of this new life, walking the edges of her curse like a lion in its cage. She has seen lions now. They came to Paris in the spring as part of an exhibit. They were nothing like the beast of her imagination, so much grander and so much less, their majesty diminished by the dimensions of their cells. Addie went 12 times to see them, studied their mournful gazes, looking past the visitors to the gap in the tent, the single sliver of freedom. A year she spent bound within the prism of this deal, forced to suffer but not die, starve but not waste, want but not wither, every moment pressed into her own memory, while she herself slips from the minds of others with the slightest push, erased by a closing door, an instant out of sight, a moment of sleep, unable to leave a mark on anyone or anything. Ooh, I would love to reread this. I've heard some criticism of this book as well. People feel like nothing really happens. They didn't get enough of Addie. I don't know. I didn't really get that when I was reading it, so that's another reason why I would like to reread it. But honestly, nothing can take away from the beautiful writing, in my opinion. This next one I read in June, so that will be in my June wrap-up link down below. This is the one nonfiction on this list. However, it is written just like a thriller. I swear, this is like a survival horror. It is so good. Every person that I've seen read this has absolutely loved it. And that is The Wager by David Grann. And this is about the true story of a British vessel called The Wager. And in the mid-1700s, they go chasing after a Spanish galleon called the Prize of All Oceans. Well, it doesn't really go as expected. They end up shipwrecking. They're going through really treacherous seas. It's storming really badly. They end up wrecking. So they are trying to survive on this deserted island. So there's a lot of adventure, there's murder, there's mutiny, there's doing whatever you can to survive. Well, some of the men are able to put together a raft. They basically make their way about 100 days and they finally reached land. And they tell their story and they're looked at as heroes. But then sometime after, there's another raft that comes upon shore with only a few people, and they have quite a different story to tell. And we know that there's conflicting stories because of the logs that they kept. And there's actually court proceedings that happened because You know, what happens when you are faced with life and death situations and you don't think you're going to survive? You know, are people really going to hold rank and respect each other like that? Things kind of fall apart. So, like I said, even though this is nonfiction, it's written like a thriller, a survival adventure horror. Let's say you're not really a big nonfiction reader, but you like ocean horror or survival horror or thrillers like that. I highly recommend this. This is also a great addition because not only do you get the beautiful art on the cover here, but you'll have the different routes that they take, the ship and the rafts that they have. I mean, could you imagine being on a dinky little raft going all the way around here? I mean, that's scary just on a regular ship. There is some artwork in here, copies of the log, it looks like, some more artwork. And then you have some notes in the back. And then also for each chapter, you get basically footnotes, so it gives you additional information and clarification. There's also a bibliography and an index. So it has really great resource material. I mean, you can basically treat it like a history book, but it's an engaging one that you'll want to constantly flip the page to find out what happens. And I do have one quote from this to share with you. Empires preserve their power with the stories that they tell, but just as critical are the stories they don't. The dark silences they impose, the pages they tear out. So yes, I absolutely recommend this, and I can't wait to reread it. And the last book I have to talk about I read in December. This book has been featured quite a lot recently, but I can't help it, okay? It was one of my favorites, and that is Bunny by Mona Awad. Again, literary fiction, but a little bit of satirical elements to it. It has some fantasy elements, a little bit of horror, maybe some magical realism. No, Fritz. So in this, we follow Samantha, who is going to college, an MFA program for creative writing, and she has 4 other girls in her class. They go to a workshop, and because there's only 4 other girls and they're in a very tight clique, Samantha feels quite ostracized, and she's kind of always been like that. A little bit of an outcast, kind of always alone. She's had a rough life, she has some trauma from her past, and she tries to use her trauma in her writing because art, okay, Fritz, because trauma creates art. Because you can use trauma to create art. Oh my god. So anyway, Samantha does have a friend named Ava, and they are talking together. I think they're in the quad. They're kind of laughing, and this gets the attention of the bunnies who are sitting close by. And they didn't really pay attention to her ever before, but now all of a sudden they did, and they invite her to their personal private workshop called the Smut Salon. And some very strange, unexpected things happen there. She actually ends up befriending them. Things are going okay for a while, but then they just spiral out of control. This has a lot of blending of illusion and reality, very surreal, very fever dream-like. You almost don't know what's real or not. And honestly, on the second time, I've realized there are many interpretations you could take from this book. That is why I want to read it again for the 3rd time. And although I believe that this book is definitely hyped for a reason, a cult classic, a modern cult classic, I wouldn't say it's for everyone. But I would say if you feel drawn to it for any reason, go ahead and give it a shot. And the imagery that she evokes with her writing is just absolutely amazing. I'll just give you a few examples. She's staring at me with her neutral expression of infinite patience, the same expression she wears whenever I speak in workshop. Of all of them, her prose is the most inaccessible and cryptic, etched on panes of glass, using a dagger-shaped diamond she wears around her neck. I've never really not written, never not had another world of my own making to escape to. Never known how to be in this world without most of my soul dreaming up and living in another. I really like this one. It says, read, be a guest in other worlds. That's one of the reasons why I read. The way she says alone makes it sound like a cave, like some hideous dark cave whose oozing walls are teeming with all the unpleasant things of this world. And I am crawling willingly, brazenly, into this awful space of my own free will, shoveling the vermin I find scuttling across the floor into my mouth for sustenance. That's just a few examples. I did annotate quite a bit. I tabbed a lot, I underlined a lot, I highlighted, I wrote in it. this book is going to be well loved. So these are the 4 literary fiction and the 1 nonfiction that are my favorites from last year. And you can see I need to annotate the wager. So this will wrap it up for my favorite books of last year. I've done horror, thriller, fantasy, sci-fi, YA, and now lit fic and non-fic. So this will be it for my favorites books of last year. However, I did have some disappointing books of last year. Now maybe they're not the worst per se, but disappointing to me, and I think I have about 10 of those. So be on the lookout for that. I'll have my video of 10 disappointing books of last year. So if you've made it this far and want to let me know with an emoji, let's go ahead and leave the wave emoji. Anything to do with the ocean? Yeah, that sounds good because we have the wager and then there's the great wave here on tomorrow. And thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it and I hope to see you again soon.